So about a week ago, Greedfall 2 launched into early access. And now that I've had a chance to play a significant chunk of content, I can see the Dragon Age Origins DNA within this new ambitious RPG. This is not to say that Greedfall 2 is anywhere near as good as Dragon Age Origins, far from it, but Spiders has delivered us a kind of experience we haven't seen in the 15 years since Bioware released the first masterpiece in the Dragon Age franchise. In this video, we're going to go over the pros and cons of Greedfall 2 and decide whether it's worth playing in its current early access state. So without further ado, let's buckle up, grab some iced coffee, and dive into the world of Greedfall 2. So let's set the stage. Greedfall 2 is a prequel story to the smash hit 2019 game from Spiders Studio. I was captivated by the world of Greedfall with its colonial inspiration, featuring guns and magic, fluid but janky combat, and a compelling world. But rather than iterating on the formula of the first game, Spiders decided to go in a different direction with the combat of Greedfall 2. No longer an action RPG, Greedfall 2 offers a real-time with pause strategy combat experience reminiscent of Dragon Age Origins and Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. This pivot of the combat has been quite controversial, with many fans expressing dissatisfaction with the pre-release trailers, which prompted the studio to post a response on Twitter earlier this year. But you know what will never be unsatisfying? Hitting that like button and subscribing to Big Dan Gaming. I make videos about RPGs and action games, so be sure to subscribe right now if you want to see more. Appreciate you, dude. Personally, I really enjoy real-time with pause combat, but I also appreciate that it has a much steeper learning curve than its cousin, turn-based strategy combat a la Baldur's Gate 3. Since everything is playing out in real time simultaneously, it can be difficult to tell what's happening in combat encounters compared to when each individual ally and enemy takes their turn one by one. This old school genre was popular in the late 90s and early 2000s with the original Baldur's Gate games, Neverwinter Nights, and Icewind Dale, among others. But the genre has fallen out of favor in recent years, aside from a few standout games like Pillars of Eternity and Pathfinder, which sought to rekindle the genre. Since this is the first time Spiders has developed a strategy RPG of this sort, they've decided to release the game in early access to solicit feedback from players on how they can improve the game. I'm generally skeptical of early access titles, but if it worked for Baldur's Gate 3, then maybe it can work for Greedfall 2. Plus, Spiders is planning to release the full game next year, so I can imagine most of the content is already in development. So let's start off with character customization. You start off the game by creating your character, a native of Tier 4D, which is the island where most of the first game takes place. The character customization options are kind of disappointing, to be honest, with less options for faces and hair than the first game. One other thing that really threw me off is that the male and female body types are all mashed together with no real order to them. And since some of the models look relatively androgynous, I wasn't even 100% sure I was creating a male character when I was choosing the body, which is not something I ever had to question in any other RPG I've played. I'll cut them a little slack since this game is currently in early access, but I certainly hope they will expand upon the options for customizing the appearance of your character and do a better job of organizing the options. The prologue of the game takes place in Tier 4D, and about 90% of the characters in the starter zone speak a made-up native language that does not exist in the real world. While I commend the devs for their commitment to world building, I really think this choice hurts the new player experience, as you will have to entirely rely on reading subtitles to understand what's going on. I typically play video games in the evening after I finish my video production work for the day, and I like to be able to passively listen to dialogue and cutscenes. So I admit I ended up zoning out during a few conversations in Greedfall 2 and missed some key details.
Quid bud e dead madiam bud radai dale dach?
La pravinde novege, es runam donegade, sag voglendade.
It's extremely important to hook players within the first hour of gameplay, so I think the decision to have all the characters speak gibberish for the first 4 to 5 hours of the game is a huge mistake for roping players into the experience. Now, after the prologue, you will go back to the other continent, which was where you actually started the game off in Greedfall 1, and most of the characters there will be speaking English, so this is really only an early game problem, but the early game is the most crucial part of the experience because that's when you hook the player in. So let's talk about the combat. The combat has been pretty fun for me so far. There are a variety of different builds you can pursue, similar to the first game, including magic, firearms, blades, and blunt weapons. You control a party of up to 4 characters, your main plus 3 companions, though you will only have 2 companions in the prologue. The skill trees and abilities are quite extensive in comparison to the first Greedfall, though some of the options are not filled out yet since we are still in early access. The combat is very Dragon Age Origins coded, certainly more so than the Veilguard. So for Dragon Age fans looking for a return to the glory days of 2009, this might be right up your alley. One thing that kind of disappointed me were the graphics and animations. Greedfall kind of had an outdated look back in 2019, and there has been zero improvement in the character models or animations. I appreciate that Spiders is a small studio that doesn't have the resources or staff to produce a AAA quality game, but not making any improvements at all is pretty disappointing, considering the game has been in development for like 4 or 5 years at this point. Some of the maps look pretty from an art direction standpoint, but overall the game has a last-gen look and feel to it. But hey, at least it's not a full-price game, so maybe I shouldn't complain too much. The companions and story, on the other hand, hooked me in. I particularly like Ludwig and the badass merchant babe Sybil. There will be romance in Greedfall 2 as well, so RP enjoyers will have a field day with these companions, I'm sure. Greedfall 2 also improved the talent system so that you can perform at least basic level 1 actions like potion crafting, lockpicking, disarming traps, etc., without wasting points on talent trees you're not interested in for your build. But you'll still need to invest more points to pass the more difficult talent checks, so I think this is a good balancing decision. You also have more carrying capacity, so you won't be running into the age-old RPG problem of over-encumbrance every 2 minutes. At the end of the day, I really enjoyed Greedfall 2, and I look forward to the full release next year. I know I've leveled a lot of criticisms in this video, but I do think this game has a lot of promise. And this franchise has a lot of promise from a lore and story standpoint, and I hope that the game will be well received amongst RPG fans. But because of the genre change and the decision to soft launch into early access, I am worried about the future of Greedfall 2. The player count on Steam has been pitifully low, and I wonder if this game will just end up being a complete flop when it reaches its full launch. I certainly hope not. But if the game does fail, we may not get a Greedfall 3. At the end of the day, it's the players who will decide whether or not they want to buy and play Greedfall 2, so I guess we'll just have to see how things play out. But if you want to check out the game for yourself, it's currently available on Steam for $40, which is $10 cheaper than it will be on launch. The game will also be available on consoles when the full game releases, but at the moment, I believe it's only available on Steam. So what do you guys think of Greedfall 2? Have you played the game yourself yet? Let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to Big Dan Gaming for more RPG videos. Big shout out to all the channel members for supporting my content. Until next time, this has been Big Dan. I should go.